Hello, and welcome to this Meet the Alumni event brought to you by the Alumni and Development team at the University of Bradford. I hope you're all keeping well. My name is Philip Fisher, Senior Development Officer at the University of Bradford, and I'm delighted to be introducing this Meet the Alumni event with graduate Chris Rhodes, co-founder and Chief Operating Officer of POA Internet, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Ironically, Chris is actually joining us from Bradford today, not from Kenya itself. The eagle-eyed amongst you in our alumni community may realise this is part 2 of Chris's story, the first part being featured in our graduate magazine back in 2015. So we're delighted to be telling you the second part of the story. This webinar event will last for about an hour and will be split into 2 parts. The first 40 to 45 minutes will feature a conversation with our guest, Chris Rhodes. And during the second part, we will open the discussion and invite questions from the audience. You can in fact submit your questions during the conversation using the Q&A function, which should be visible on your screen. I'm also delighted to say that to tell the real story of POA Internet, that we've been joined by fellow alumna Regina Materu, Gender, Peace and Social Development Specialist and Rotary Peace Fellow. Regina is based in Nairobi, Kenya. So we have one person joining us from Kenya for this event, which is also, as I mentioned, where Chris and his company are, well, where the company is based and where Chris is usually based. Regina will be chairing this session, and I will now like to open the stage to her to introduce the topic and our speaker. Regina, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Philip, for this opportunity. I'm excited to be here today, to the alumni, to our guests who have joined us, to the students in the university, and the friends of the university from all over who are joining us today. I am excited to host Chris. I am in Kenya currently, and in a town far away from Nairobi. It's called Sagana. It's in the central side of Kenya. And I'm sure from my background, you can see movement of people. I have found myself in a space where this is the best spot I could have to host this meeting. So you'll bear with me in that regard. But besides that, the most excitement is that we have Chris, who has a business in Kenya. He's not Kenyan himself. Perhaps it's been Kenyanized. Maybe he will tell us. But currently, we are hosting him from the UK. He is based in the UK and is in the UK currently. Chris graduated with a bachelor in electrical engineering with management from the University of Bradford in 1994, which some of you would imagine it's many, many years ago, while I graduated in the same university in 2015. While having a conversation with Chris in another setup was like, I feel like, you know, an oldie, the way you call yourself an oldie from an institute. And with him, during that time when he was in the university, a guy called Adi also, together they co-founded the POA Internet, an internet provider that is based in this country in Kenya. And what makes it unique is that it focuses on communities, on issues of sustainability. As much as they are bridging the digital divide, they are offering affordable solutions for the Kenyan communities, especially the grassroots in this country. And their mission is to accelerate education, economic growth, and social inclusion. 20 years ago, Chris was part of the founding team of TalkTalk, one of the fast growing ISPs in the UK. In addition to his degree, Chris holds an MBA from London Business School and Kelgol School of Management in Chicago. And when running POA Internet, along with his wife, when he is not busy, he supports a number of animal conservation efforts across Kenya. And today, he is here to share with us why POA Internet, why University of Bradford, why Kenya, of all the countries, why did he choose to come and, you know, have the company started in Kenya? Is it that we don't have other companies providing, you know, solutions in terms of internet in Kenya? he will be able to share more with us in that regard. And to kickstart us off, I would request Chris just to highlight to us why he chose the University of Bradford as his university during those many years. Karibu sana, Chris.
Asante sana, Regina, and thank you everybody else. Wow, I was listening to that introduction and actually wondering who you were talking about, but when we got onto the very old part, I recognized it was me. Very excited to try and share the second part of the story. Ironically, as Regina said, I'm actually back over in Bradford. I have definitely become more Kenyan than Yorkshire in the last 10 years because I am freezing cold and need to get home back to the sunshine, even if it is the rainy season. If I think back to my time at Bradford, it was actually a strange story how I managed to end up there. To be perfectly honest, I didn't want to go to university. I actually wanted to be a pop star because the first love in my life is actually music. So I'd already taken a year out after school and perfectly honestly had no intention of going to university because I was going to become rich and famous. Unfortunately, a story of my life that didn't quite play out. So at some point in time, my dad came up to me and told me I should really go and get a proper qualification and a real job rather than playing around at all this musician stuff. Bradford happened to have one of the best BEng degree programs in the country at that time, and also it allowed me to stay local so that I could basically balance my studies while still playing in bands and working in recording studios, and that's where it came from. So probably not as much planning and research into Bradford. It just happened to be near where I was working in a recording studio and just happened to have a fantastic electronic engineering degree. And that's where it all started.
Interesting. Thank you, Chris. And very interesting to even know that you wanted to be a pop star, but you finally ended up in Bradford doing engineering. So perhaps you'll tell us more about the pop star if we manage to get time to even get to know whether the pop star, the musician in you, still exists, or no, those ideas were taken to another space. And while at the University of Bradford, I'm sure you created memories, whether good or bad. We would want to hear some of the memorable memories that you had while at the university.
Yeah, so once we filter out, well, so obviously the correct answer at university is I can't remember any of it, because that would be a really rock and roll degree for 3 years. But I wasn't actually that exciting, which is possibly why I was never a pop star, because I'm just not rock and roll enough. So we need to filter out a few things first. We obviously need to filter out basically living for 3 years on curries. Although I've still managed to keep that going for the 30 years past my time at Bradford. And I think also there was a bit of a rugby scene. But other than a fond memory of sitting on one of my classmates' apartment floors far too often eating egg noodles, which for some reason sprung to mind, I think my biggest takeaway was actually the teachers. Never tell them that though. We keep them on their toes, because I wasn't very confident actually. In fact, I'm still not particularly confident today. I cover it up quite well, but I wasn't confident. I probably matured quite late, so by the time I got to university, I wasn't very worldly. I didn't really know what was going on. I definitely didn't know what I wanted to do. And part of it, I was probably there because my dad was telling me to go and get some qualifications. So it was actually quite scary. And I think my fondest memory is how the tutors made me feel. So there was there was encouragement, there was openness. It was okay to sit there and say you didn't know what you wanted to do, or whether even I wanted to go into a career in electronic engineering. And I think by having that supportive approach, actually what it did was it created an environment where you could listen a bit more. It wasn't directional. It wasn't, oh, you should do this, this, and this. And by having that, it sort of allowed you to listen to yourself, really, and just sort of decide what you like doing, what you don't like doing. And then finally, when I got towards my final years, you find out what you love doing. And that for me, within it wasn't power engineering. I'm really sorry if anybody did power engineering. It was definitely not power engineering. It was telecom, it was media, it was TV, it was obviously music as well, because the overlap between music and electronics is it was electronic music was evolving, and digital recording, and putting things onto a hard drive on a computer, all sorts of things that are everybody has now but didn't exist then. So showing my age, of course, you've got to bear in mind, when I went to university, we had 3 computers, and those 3 computers had access to this thing called the internet, which is showing how very old I am. And there were no mobile phones. So I think, yeah, my fondest, I have very fond memories all the way through, but as a troubled, restless soul who didn't really know what he wanted to do, I think the encouragement that the faculty gave throughout that process was really probably my biggest takeaway.
Thank you, Chris, for being even open enough to say, you know, some of the things you liked and others that you didn't like, others that just you flew with the flow, you know, finding yourself in a space you don't even understand some of the things you're undertaking. And I would imagine after your university moments and after graduating, you then now got into your career.
Yeah.
To a point now where you are founded for internet and as the chief operating officer. Perhaps even before founding it, you've had other opportunities of serving in other positions.
Yeah.
So
just for everybody's benefit, she's not on a power internet connection in Kenya, or I hope she's not.
Chris, I will just jump in and finish that question for Regina, and hopefully the connection will join back into the next one. So could you briefly just walk us through your career, as Regina said, from your time at university up until your current position at POA?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I still had no idea what I wanted to do when I finished university, other than harboring the desire to still be a pop star. And I used to think that hindered me. But actually, with hindsight of several decades, it probably didn't, because I think if you're not sure and you don't know where you want to be and what you want to do, what that means is you focus on the next thing. And so you end up moving towards things you enjoy doing and moving away from things that you don't enjoy doing. So I left university. I was still working in recording studios and a little music shop down in Manningham Lane in Bradford. And a guy came in who used to be one of my customers, who bought guitars off me, and he just started working for this new thing called a cable company, and it was Bradford Cable. And he had lots of money to buy guitars and said that they paid lots of money, so that seemed like a reasonably good way to start the career. And I started life building the little green boxes by the side of the roads as an engineer. So it enabled me to still have my other hobbies and other passions and keep going at them. So this love of music kept going all the way through. And I was working and earning money doing different things as well as a day job. But so I discovered quite quickly I probably didn't want to be an engineer. because it was cold and you had to be outside, and you got wet and things like that. And then the other people in the company who kind of worked in these things called sales and marketing and product development, and they all had cars instead of a van, and they looked to be doing better. So I moved a couple of times within that company, but then there was an opportunity to move to London, and I actually applied for a job for a bet, to win a bet, because I was looking this is pre-internet, so they were in magazines with job adverts, and there was a job advert there, and I said to my friend, I'm like, I could do that, and it was paying an absolute fortune, before you realized how expensive it was to move to London. And I said, I could do that. No, you couldn't. And so I think we bet £10 or something. And ultimately then I ended up getting the job. And that was, again, fluke rather than anything else. I got a job, and it just happened to be with a super fast growing American global telecom operator at the start of the internet boom. And so I'm mid-20s being bounced all over the world in an exhausting job, managing projects all over the world, where I kind of started to discover my second true passion in life after music, which is travel and adventures. So again, you lean into things that you enjoy doing. And so I think that formulated through. I've always been quite aware of the things I do like and the things I don't like. I don't react particularly well when I don't like things, so I stay away from them. But this pattern of kind of technical engineering, telecom networky stuff, and then this other pattern of, well, there's another group of people in the company over there that are doing this commercial stuff, and that really kind of sat. So the more people I talked to over that side, the more that became interesting, but they used words I didn't understand, and they talked about things like EBITDA and strategy and economics and things like that. So I decided that in order to progress, I had to get an MBA, and whether or not that was the right approach, I ended up, trying to get a school over in the US, because the travel and adventures meant I wanted to go and live somewhere else. So I've always had a desire to go and live somewhere else. So I ended up doing my MBA at London Business School in Chicago, and then tried to get a job working in the US. Didn't quite make it. Came back to the UK again, but again, global roles, bouncing around, lots of travel, lots of time in hotels, lots of air miles. The travel thing started to gain quite a lot of momentum, so most of my time outside of work was spent traveling, and that's where my third passion came from, which is actually photography. And at the end of 2003, 2004, I got an opportunity to take redundancy from a company that was actually going into Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. And I spent 6 months traveling across Patagonia, so right down to the bottom of South America and back up. So lots of animals and mountains and things like that. And when I ran out of cash and I had to come home, it just had a coincidental chat with a friend of mine who used to work for me, whose company, this little company in the UK called Carphone Warehouse, was introducing a refer a friend scheme, and he asked if he could put my CV in, and I said yes, but I'm a telecom internet guy, and so I have no idea why anybody who sells mobile phones in a shop would want my experience. But about 3 or 4 hours later, I got a phone call asking me if I could come to London for an interview, and I was offered a job about a week later. And it turned out that Carphone Warehouse, for those of you who know, was owned by a gentleman called Charles Dunstan, or Sir Charles Dunstan now. And he'd had an idea that he wanted to set up a new internet company. And we called it TalkTalk. And I was part of that initial journey that went from 0 to 1 million customers in about 9 months. broke every part of the organization in the process, and was just a heck of a ride. So I think that's my real first entrepreneurial experience. But it was brutal, absolutely brutal. And so when you get to the end of it all and you realize that you've basically given your soul to somebody else for many, many years, and actually it was a FTSE 100 company by the time I left, worth kind of over £2 billion. Somebody else owned all the shares, and somebody else ultimately got the benefit for a large quantity of blood, sweat and tears. And I started forming this view that while not necessarily driven by masses and masses of capital appreciation, definitely if you're going to put that level of passion and energy into something, you probably want it to be a little bit more of your own. So I kind of decided that I needed to do it myself, but at that point in time, still it's scary because I didn't know what to do and didn't know how to approach it. So I think TalkTalk was the first real entrepreneurial journey. And then after that, I did another couple of early stage startups with equity, so with shareholders, significant shareholding in there, and they didn't work out. So they didn't work out probably because I wasn't that passionate about it. Probably the businesses might not have been right. I mean, one of the key things to take away as an entrepreneurial journey is there's not many of them succeed. So you have to keep going. And then through network, coincidence, fate, whatever you want to call it, in 2014, I get introduced to this guy called Andy Halsell, and we don't know each other. And then over the space of a cup of coffee that turned into a couple of gin and tonics, we realized we were both at Bradford University at the same time. He's a computer scientist, so we won't hold that against him, but super cool guy. There at the same time, never met. We both actually were loitering around London Business School for our MBA at the same time and never met. And we'd both done a couple of decades in telecoms and mutually knew about 150 people. So that became the start of what is now known as a beautiful friendship. And we started working together. So we ended with POA started by, we were doing projects all over the world on behalf of a fund, which was investing in developing market telecom projects. And actually Kenya was one of them. And it ended up, we were trying to pull together the UK Space Agency, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a local bank in Kenya and some others. And after a couple of months, we realized there were far too many egos in the room for this project to be a success. But both Andy and I sat there and decided that, unfortunately, with this one, the project had landed with our hearts and not our heads. And as we both admitted that as soon as it lands here and not here, then all bets are off at that point in time, and we kind of had to do it. So we agreed we were going to do it. We phoned each other up the morning after and asked if either person was rich, and then disappointingly neither of us were rich, so we had to raise some money, and that's where the POA journey started.
Great, thanks for that overview, Chris. Really exciting. Unfortunately, guys, I think you're going to be stuck with me for a little bit, so it's going to be my face and my voice for the next few questions. So in that career journey, whether it's through the roles before POA or in the years, I think you said 2013 that you, I think you said you started out in Kenya, what would you consider were some of your biggest successes in that career and journey so far?
I mean, there was an early success where I would say adapting from a young little lad from Yorkshire where nobody in the family had even done A-levels, let alone gone to university. I think the first transition into the UK, London, and then global side of things was a personal success, but that was probably assisting me in getting over my insecurities. Career-wise, TalkTalk has to be in there. It's got to be. It was insane. We, the people who were involved at that point in time we still talk about it today. I couldn't do it at this age with this level of energy now. It was just absolute insanity. And we took on the incumbents, and we were the underdogs. We took on the incumbents. We found a niche market as a value player and went big, and it was just the wildest, craziest ride in the world. So that has to be in there, but POA obviously has to be the best because it's our baby. And I think for those people interested in, do they do corporate, do they do entrepreneurial, do they make the leap, all of those kind of things, you can only do something like this if your heart and soul's into it. Because of the impact it has on your broader life and your families and your friends, as well as the people you work with. So even though we kind of stumbled into it by accident or by fate, or just by the fact that we're Bradford alumni, that's the one I'm proudest of. I think that other than it being probably my greatest success so far, and bear in mind we are still flat broke, so you can't measure success in terms of financial yet. Hopefully one day it will become something, but currently I am more in debt than when I was at university with you guys. I think it's more, it has a purpose beyond just going to work. So I think if you sort of consider that, and you can find that earlier in your career, then I think that's great. I think quite a lot of my career I was, perhaps again with the insecurity, perhaps trying to be what I thought other people thought I should be, possibly having the wrong definition of success, or I've made it as, material things, or a funny coloured credit card, or a flashy car, or whatever. And I think actually, flat broke, earning less money than I was making in a salary in 1999, but doing something that actually feels worthwhile, definitely puts this one in as the most successful so far, but from a fulfillment perspective.
Great, no, that's really interesting, Chris. And I think we're going to come on to the purpose of POA, which I think is really interesting, slightly later on. You touched on some of these actually, so this is going to be quite interesting. So going from successes to the other end of the spectrum, what would you consider some of your biggest professional mistakes? I've put an S on the end there, so there might be a few. And what have you learned from each one of those that you could share?
Wow, yeah, we only have an hour, don't we? And at least you help me filter them by just saying business mistakes rather than on my personal ones as well. Wow, finally an advantage to being old and being able to look backwards. We're called Mzee in Kenya, by the way, so if Regina was still on, she would be calling me Mzee. Okay, chasing the money. There you go. There's the first one. I've admitted it finally. Chasing the money does not lead anywhere. Doesn't lead to happiness, doesn't lead to fulfillment. My restless soul continued for longer than it needed to do because I was trying to become something I thought I had to be. And I think it was trying to prove it to others and just a confidence kick. And I think I made some decisions on that money side of things. I've been fired. Let's go to full mistakes. The first time I was fired, it probably took me 2.5 years to come to terms with the fact that it was probably my fault rather than the person that I blamed for 2.5 years. Who's now a really good friend, actually, because I actually phoned her up. I bumped into her in a restaurant and went up to her and said, actually, you firing me was actually the best thing that ever happened. Because it taught me several things. It taught me that if you ever work for another company and it's not your own, then no matter where you are, you can be fired. So there's a career risk perspective. But it also taught me to appreciate, or try to appreciate, other people's points of view. So I think it's very easy to go, I was fired because the other person was an idiot and they didn't understand what I was saying. But actually, other people have a different perspective, a different point of view. I'd say some of my other mistakes, again, these are more personal choices, but twice I've worked in a place where I was genuinely unhappy and I kept going. Now, whether that's fear of not being able to get out, fear of, another job, fear of not having the amazing salary that I was earning in both of those roles, or job title or status. I think doing it again, I'd listen to myself a bit earlier and just make the call earlier, because unhappiness, miserable, toxic relationships. I worked in a company, a crazy startup, and the chairman was not a Bradford University alumni, so I can call him a lunatic without getting sued. But most of the time he was telling me I was absolutely useless. But I was being paid a fortune, and it was interesting but not exciting. I just bought a house. I just signed up to a crazy mortgage, and I kind of decided to power on through. And that was not the right thing to do, because it affects everything. It affects actually your insecurities, if they're still there. It affects your health, physical and mental. You just start questioning everything. And actually, some people, pairs of people or groups of people or individuals, just aren't the type of people you want to hang around with. So when you find yourself in those situations, call it earlier, I would say, and just believe in your own sanity and peaceful frame of mind, because ultimately these things do unravel. So best for you to be in control rather than then having to react later, I'd say.
Great, thanks, Chris. That's some really great advice, and actually comes on to the fact that, as you say, POA is now a passion project. So you've kind of got that fulfillment now in what you're doing. And that the next question kind of relates to where you are now with POA. Now you're 8 years on from having set up. What would you say were the biggest obstacles you faced while you were setting up the business, going from your TalkTalk experience where you were massively successful and adapting it to a completely different environment?
Wow, it's where I need to call my therapist for backup. Joking aside, it doesn't matter how much desktop research you do, nothing can prepare you for hands on the ground, wherever you are. And actually, you can apply that to anything. You need to make sure you have, a business model. You need to make sure you have a vision, mission that really addresses a problem. You don't need to have the answer. So startup life can be about winging it for the first 18 to 24 months until you figure out what the answer is. But make sure that whatever you're going to do, whatever you believe in and whatever you're passionate about, you're honest enough with yourselves to make sure you're solving a really, really big problem, even if you don't quite know how you're going to do it yet. So big market, big problem to solve, big impact, research away. We picked Kenya because on paper it looked like it was one of the most welcoming countries in Africa in terms of doing business. Laziness, English language taught, English legal system, some relatively open commercial environment, fairly well regulated. not a bad government structure, not a dictatorship. So on paper, seemed like the right place. Nothing prepares you for what happens when you get on the ground. So you have to, wherever you are, doesn't matter whether it's Africa or Europe or the US or Asia or wherever, but on the ground, figuring out how things work, not how people say they work, is critical, critical, critical. People are everything, and I'm not saying that because it's the right thing to say, to be a people-y person, but you have to get into the psyche of what's going on wherever you are operating. And then if you're going somewhere with very different cultures, you know, I have to become Kenyan rather than trying to shoehorn my culture into Kenya. And lots of businesses that you see fail, or charities around Africa especially, is you get a lot of the kind of the missionary complex where people turn up and they've just turned up to come and save Africa. That is not the right way to do this, because, well, one, it won't work, but two, you know, businesses will only succeed over there if they are run by people over there. I am too old, culturally not aligned, and just should not be the next generation of entrepreneurs that are building companies over there. So you have to go to a place, if you're going somewhere you've never been or somewhere where you've never worked before, you have to kind of approach this, that you're a guest in someone else's country, not the other way around. And I think a lot of that can be applied kind of philosophically as well, just to frame how you approach things, if that makes sense. Hope that explains some of the bumps in the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that, Chris. I thought what would be quite interesting just to pop in here is you kind of explained there when you were looking to set up an internet company and to adapt it. I think maybe just as a little bit of an introduction to this answer, if you could just explain where the name POA came from, because that might make
Sure.
a lot of sense to our Kenyan audience. It didn't to me when we discussed. But what was the gap in the market that you saw when you were bringing POA to market? What was the unique angle that you were trying to take when adapting an internet business to work in the Kenyan market?
Yeah, sure. So first up, the word POA is actually street slang. So English and Kiswahili are the two official languages of Kenya. You're taught those in school. When you go hang out in the street or in these informal communities and underserved communities, there's a third language called Sheng, which is basically slang. So if I said to you in English, good morning, Philip, how are you? Oh, good afternoon, Philip, how are you? And you said, I'm very well, thank you, Chris, how are you? We can have a conversation in English. If I was meeting you down the sheer bridge, I may fist bump you if I was trying to be young and trendy, but I might kind of say, yo, what's up? And you might say, yo, cool, or whatever. POA means cool. So if I meet you in the street, I won't say habari asubuhi, which is hello, how are you? I will say niaji, which kind of means yo, sup? And the answer to that is POA, which is I'm cool, yeah, I'm great. So we were doing formal market research in the second biggest slum in Africa, just outside Nairobi, where you learn things on the fly. So formal market research doesn't work, for example, after you've done a week of it, because actually the only reason people are turning up to give you answers to your questions about internet usage is because you're providing lunch, and they can take that lunch home and feed their family. So you learn every day. But when we were in there, there was just, what's this POA thing? What they're like, I don't know what's going on. I don't really understand, but lots of people keep saying POA and they look happy when they say it, and they kind of slap each other's hands and give each other hugs and things like that. So, and we asked what it was, and it was kind of like, huh, that kind of works. So, you know, these informal communities are where this started at grassroots level, and actually let's base the name on that, and that's where it came from. So yeah, that was the name. I mean, the kind of the landing and moving it over there, the big problem to solve is actually a global problem. You know, 4 billion people on the planet still don't have access to the internet. So you take that at a macro level, 50% of the planet doesn't have access to the internet. And while we all seem to, you know, we can sit and have a 50-50 view that, oh, the internet's got lots of bad stuff on it as well. That's actually because we're used to the normality of what the good side of the internet does as well. So for people who can't get online because it's either too expensive or they don't have access, that's a really, really big problem. It doesn't create a level playing field across the planet for people to be the best they can be and to, you know, make the most of their lives on their lifelong journey. So that was where the problem came from. I mean, even in Kenya, which is pretty well established, you know, 29 million smartphones in existence, 29 million mobile phones in existence. So in theory, 29 million internet users on their mobile phone, but the average consumption of internet in Kenya is like 750 megabytes a month because it's too expensive. There are fiber providers in and around big cities like Nairobi. So just the same as we have in the UK, but the top 3 fiber providers are only going after the top 1 million homes in Kenya, and there are 13 million homes in Kenya. So we decided we'd try and offer affordable internet, and we are less than half the price of anybody else in Kenya, to people that can't get it, or to people that are underserved or have to buy really expensive data bundles. So we built our entire business trying to make internet as affordable as possible for as many people as possible, because we want to put internet in every home in Africa, which is an enormous mission. But bit by bit, we will continue to move along that journey to get as far as we can.
Great, thank you so much for that, Chris. And again, your question feeds into the next one I had lined up, which is absolutely perfect. And that is that, as we've discussed and you've highlighted there, that your work at POA has a clear mission and a clear purpose. As you say, that's the kind of thing which gives you the enjoyment in the role that you have, using technology and connecting people as a catalyst for sustainability and social change. Can you just talk a bit further about why that's important to you? I know from our conversations that relates to both what you're trying to do with POA, but also what you're kind of externally in terms of your communities and as an organization internally as well. So why is that important to you, and how does that translate to the day-to-day for the activity of POA?
When you get older, you start thinking about other things apart from yourself, or maybe I was too selfish as my younger person. The biggest things, so that there's kind of 3 main threads. So there's a POA thread. You know, we employ 400 people now. Let's say over 300 of those are from these informal communities that we serve. So when we provide these guys and girls with, you know, meaningful employment, you know, training, development, healthcare, benefits, and you light the fire under them, for them all to be the best that they can be, it's amazing to watch. So, you know, Kenyan culture is still quite traditional and quite hierarchical. So when we turn up as an organization and we all sit on hot desks, and if Chris walks in the office and there's no chair, Chris sits in the garden, or on a step. If you are a junior customer service representative and you want to tell Chris something, you walk up to Chris and tell him something. You don't have to ask your team leader, to ask the manager, to ask the director, to ask their boss. So we've always had that culture. So we're trying to, I don't want to implement a, you know, US, UK, Silicon Valley type of culture, because that's not Kenya. But I want to make available, or we try to make available, the types of things that we see that work anywhere around the world. So empowerment, engagement, allowing people to have opinions, having fun, laughing and joking, owning things, taking responsibility, integrity. And so that plays out across the company. And when people come in, some of the time it takes them a few months to get used to the idea, because, the first time you make a mistake and we celebrate it is very, very counterintuitive in Kenya, because if you make a mistake in Kenya, you either get fired or at very least told off. Nobody in the world's ever done what we're trying to do in the locations we're trying to do this. So the old phrase that you need to break some eggs to make a cake is very apt here. And, I could make mistakes all day long. I usually do. I've been doing that for 30 years. If you can convince everybody else to make mistakes, then you learn a lot. I mean, look at Elon Musk with his big Starship rocket last week. It blew up and everybody's like, oh no, it's blown up. And he's like, brilliant, what did we learn? It's that philosophy. So there's one thread about the organization. If we can employ hopefully thousands of people over the next 5 to 10 years in 10 countries, that would be brilliant. If we can empower the next generation of entrepreneurs, the majority of people in our company are shareholders. That's unheard of. And so if this thing works, we should be able to make some meaningful changes to people's lives that will flow through to the next generations. A regular internet customer is our next group. So the people who actually manage to get online, and when you see the benefits that brings, other than the downsides of the internet are the same as everywhere else, so social media pressures and gambling and all that kind of thing. But the upside of getting people online and seeing how that meaningfully changes their lives and business opportunities. Kenyans are brilliant as hustling entrepreneurs. So you're enabling that creativity and that hustling kind of culture to really take off if you give them a platform for them to buy and sell things, communicate, do deals. So that's really good to see and watch as that evolves. And then the third part is the communities that we work with. So when we go into an area, we don't just go in and offer paid for internet. We go in and we connect the schools. So we connect as many schools as we can. We internet enable them. We partner with UNICEF and the African Development Bank and part of CDC. And so in some schools we put computer labs. In some places we pay for teachers to train people on ICT skills. Those community engagements flow into more broader communities and in terms of how we work with those groups as well. So there's really 3 threads to it. There's a commercial thread. We always said it would have to be a commercial venture. This is not a charity. I think it's too important to be a charity. Charities sometimes lose their funding. I always used to joke that if you were funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, what would happen if they got divorced? I never actually thought that would play out, but life happens. You cut off people's internet once they've had it. It's like, imagine if your internet was taken away from you for a month. It's like cutting off food and water these days. Lots of places people argue it's a basic human right. The level of investment needed to build infrastructure across Africa, though, is pretty significant. So that's why we chose to make it a commercial venture. But the benefits of that outweigh everything else you could do. So 3 threads: building an awesome company of the next generation of entrepreneurs, seeing what internet connectivity gives the people who we serve, and then the broader community engagement and really seeing that buy-in, I think, are probably the 3 main outputs.
Great, thanks, Chris. I know from one of our previous discussions that you said in terms of the culture of POA, if any of your employees ever left to start up their own business, that you would let them go with a happy heart. So I think that's really interesting on your culture.
Might even fund them.
As long as you get a steak, maybe.
Sometimes you give back.
So on to my next question, which kind of relates to that, I guess, a bit in terms of, others looking to follow in your footsteps. So I guess if there's anyone in the audience who's looking to take their first steps on an entrepreneurial journey, whether that's now or in a few years' time, or any of your employees looking to break out on their own to start up a business, what would be your key piece of advice to people looking to start on that entrepreneurial journey?
So, key takeaways. It will be harder and take longer and cost more than you could ever dream. That's the starting point of things I wished I'd known. But if you do have a dream, definitely do it, and do it as early as you possibly can. So I had two disadvantages. I never really came up with a dream that I was that excited by, and this thing hit me like a train, so it was time. But I think by being distracted by trying to become something that other people wanted me to be, or what I thought other people wanted me to be, I probably put it off. So if you have a dream and you feel passionate about it, go for it as early as you can. It'll always be scary. You're never going to have enough money to do it, and therefore don't put it off. Jump, take the leap. Ideally take it while you don't have a giant mortgage, 3 kids and a bunch of school fees and a dog, because that just makes it easier. And the old, this is a post that spins up on LinkedIn about 3 times a day, but the whole "if you fall down, get up" is definitely, if you fall down 10 times, just make sure you get up 11. That's the one. I personally, but this again is my personality and my insecurity, I'd look for a co-founder. I imagine doing this on your own would be more terrifying and lonely, and it's really nice to have a friend along the way. Doesn't mean we don't scrap like an old married couple every once in a while, because we've been together 10 years now, but I wouldn't have it any other way. And if you are going to find a co-founder to do this with, don't just find a co-founder who you're friends with and who you get on with. Try and find somebody who's got a different skill set. Andy and I are polar opposites. In fact, when we were sat in London trying to politely work out who wanted to be CEO, Andy didn't realize I had absolutely no desire whatsoever to be CEO, because I'd been one once, and that was one of my unhappy places, because I'm not. So, Andy has a brain the size of a planet, because he's a Bradford computer scientist, obviously. The guy's a genius. I'm somewhat still surprised that he chose to hang out with me, but I'm really glad he did. So actually, Andy for strategy, finance, legals, investor negotiation, fundraising, things I hate, things I couldn't do, things I'm no good at. Go and build a scrappy company with a few hundred people in and figure out how to glue it all together is probably a little bit more up my street. And so we split responsibilities, and that's where it works. But if you've got the urge, do it. It'll be scary. You might fail, but do it earlier than you probably want to.
Great, thank you so much for that, Chris. We're now going to move on to the Q&A with some of the questions that our audience have been submitting while we've been talking. Before we do so, obviously, as you'll have noticed, Regina has unfortunately been unable to join us. I assume,
Sure.
Chris, because she isn't on a POA internet connection.
She is not. No, she is definitely not. Well, I'm going to tell you she's not anyway, even if she is. But no, she's not. She's not in a part of the country where we are.
But I'd just like to take the opportunity to express our thanks to Regina for being able to join us for the time that we had her. I'm sure, as you will have seen, I am not able to add the flavour and knowledge of Kenya and the environment that Regina would have been able to. But thank you very much for bearing with me while I go through the questions. So on to the questions from the audience. So I'll just go through these. So I've got one from Olympia, who is a current student at the University of Bradford, who is from Tanzania. And now I think you spoke a little bit about your plans to scale POA, but the question is, are there plans to scale up POA Internet and take it to another country such as Tanzania? And maybe if you could say kind of what your kind of ambitions in terms of a potential timeline for that is as well, kind of everything going in an ideal world.
Sure, Olympia, lovely to meet you virtually. If we had cameras here, I could say with a smile on my face, are you wanting me to connect one of your friends' houses, which is usually the question I get when we're asked where we're going next. Yes, we are planning to go to other countries outside Kenya. We just were very fortunate that the US TDA, so the US Trade and Development Agency, has just awarded us a pretty significant grant to work out where next. So we'll be studying every country in Africa over the next 9 to 12 months with a pretty big research program backed by the US government to decide that. I can't tell you where next. I imagine the next country will be early next year, so not long. And yes, you will be pleased to know that Tanzania is on the list. Quite close to the top.
Great, thanks, Chris. So POA will be aiming to be in another country sometime next year. I'll take that.
We're going to look to 4 to 5 countries over the next kind of, after this year. We'll still be in Kenya. We'll be nationwide across Kenya this year. And then there's a view to probably the next 4 to 5 will be mapped out over the next 18 to 24 months. So once we've got one established, we'll go more than one as part of the growth plan. It's basically prove the model, and then you've obviously got to tweak the model depending on which country you land in.
Great, fantastic, and I'm sure that'll be part 3 of the story in terms of adapting to many different countries and cultures as you go along. The next question which we've had submitted, and this kind of goes back to the start of the conversation, talking about the kind of your very early career, or indeed choosing your degree, and the question is, what advice would you give to other students, alumni, or recent graduates who aren't quite sure what direction to take in their career? That might just be go and do an entrepreneurial journey, but it might be different for different people. What would you say for people who aren't sure what direction they're going to take?
Don't worry about it. That's the starting point. I mean, we've done a few of my ground rules that I've learned being now old. So don't chase the money. Don't do what you think other people want you to do. Life's going to be tough. That's the other one. I now sound officially like an old person, but life is going to be tough. It's just it's not like it reads on social media. Bad internet suppliers that provide social media, but so don't stress it too much. The other thing, I mean, you can always say do what you love doing, don't do what you don't love doing. That's really easy, but I always had the niggle of yes, but how do I pay the rent? But it comes. So don't stress. Take your time. Try doing stuff. You know, just follow interesting journeys. Just go and investigate things. Don't just focus all on career. You know, invest in your friends and family and loved ones, because when you get to my age, you suddenly start thinking that, you know, life's running a bit shorter. And a lot of my commitments to career, bouncing all over the world while very glamorous and rock and roll, you know, I've come back to Yorkshire and I'm sat here with my family going, oh yeah, I've missed some of this. Ask people for help. Just reach out. I mean, I think it was somebody like Steve Jobs once said this, is very few people will say no if you actually ask them for help. Don't demand, be nice about it, and just listen to yourself, listen to your gut. I mean, I spent a lot of time listening to my gut and then trying to convince myself my gut wasn't right because I didn't like the answer. Simplify it down. Don't just listen to yourself. There's a lot of things, you know, either in terms of just little nudges as to what you like, what you don't like, what appeals to you, what doesn't, and try stuff. And I think that's it, you know. Engage with people, be kind, try and be curious with other people as well, and they'll be curious back. So just try and be inquisitive as to other people's journeys along the way, and hopefully they'll reciprocate that back, and that kind of curiosity breeds curiosity. So that will be my stuff. Hopefully that helps some people. You can all hunt me down on LinkedIn and see whether I respond if you ask for help after this.
Yes, thank you, Chris. And the final question I had to ask from those submitted from the audience was, you mentioned some of the mistakes you made and some of the challenges along the way, and how you came back from those. So the question is, how did you bounce back from those challenges? What's the process of going, oh, something really bad has happened, where do I go next? And what are the top tips you'd have for individuals in similar situations?
Wow, good question. Wow. Hindsight's awesome. So it's much better afterwards to come up with it was never that. It was never that cool. I crashed like everybody else. I had really bad times. I had dark times. I had depressed times. I had, you know, all of those journeys that people should talk about a lot more, I think. When you're in a dark place, it's really hard to get out of it. So, and the worst thing that in the world that somebody can do is tell you to, well, you know, just come on, snap yourself out of it. Just pull yourself together, get on with it, dust yourself off. It's like when your mum tells you there's plenty more fish in the sea after your girlfriend's just ditched you. It's not the right time. I think with hindsight, if I had maintained and I mean maintained with real conversation, not chat on social media, engaging conversation, if I had maintained conversations and meetings and face-to-face time with friends, family and loved ones, I would have had more of a support network rather than, you know, you run down the career path chasing the money and the job title, trying to be the big I am so you can look cool on LinkedIn. Actually, when stuff goes wrong, you kind of think you have to be the big I am and solve it all yourself. And that really doesn't work. But when you're in a dark place, reaching out to a friend or a colleague and asking for help, or just, you know what, just a cup of coffee, I'd say would be something that I would tell my crashed and burned former self somewhere along the road. Yeah, keep meaningful human connections, I think, is a big thing. And the career is part of the journey. You know, who you are and how you adapt to that is probably where it's more important, especially as you start getting old and grumpy like me.
Great, thank you. And a final question, which I'm sure Regina would have asked if she was still with us online. What is the best thing? I know you're back in Bradford at the moment.
Yeah.
What is the best thing about living and working in Kenya?
So the bit we pinch ourselves, my wife and I pinch ourselves on, is we basically live in the place where people spend tens of thousands of dollars or pounds for once in a lifetime honeymoons and holidays. You know, I have giraffes in my garden and I have a lion that occasionally walks down the street. That doesn't happen in Bradford very often. So I think you have to appreciate you are living in one of the most stunningly beautiful places on earth. I know Bradford's up there. But it has its conservation challenges, and that's really, really upsetting because quite a lot of Kenyan people don't appreciate what they've got. So you'll have no elephants left by the time everybody goes, oh, where have all the tourists gone? The The people are fantastic once you are in their culture, you know, caring, warm, loving, open, friendly, welcoming. And that's been great. The weather's not bad, 29 degrees all year round. We only have wet and dry season, but I do miss snow and the cold, although not this week, but normally I miss snow and cold. It's great. It's a great place, and that balance between, you know, work-life balance, where I can trot off on a weekend and go and find one of the rarest black leopards in the world, and then on my way back find a pack of wild dogs running around which haven't been seen for a year, is pretty high up there. I have 144,000 photographs I've taken over the last 10 years, so there's hobby number 3 in the passion list, being well invested in. Yeah, it's great. It's great.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for joining us as a guest for this event.
Thank you for asking me.
No, it's our pleasure, and you know, we'll invite you back in a few years' time once you're in a few other countries for part 3 of this story. And we've gone from a magazine to a digital event. The rate technology is changing. We'll probably have you back as a hologram for part 3. So
Perfect.
Thank you for being such a great guest. I think the one key takeaway that stuck with me really from that description of the entrepreneurial journey is the importance of human connections in different ways, whether it's those mistakes and helping you to get back up and going, whether it's having somebody to share that journey with you, or whether it's having an organization which is making a difference to people, which gives you the purpose to have that enjoyment. Yeah. And so I thought those were some really interesting takeaways. Thank you as well to all of our audience for joining us, and we look forward to bringing you more events from the Alumni and Development team in the future. We have a calendar full of upcoming events with further alumni guests as well as Bradford academics, and I wanted to take the time quickly to tell you about some of these next upcoming events. You can see here, left to right, you're welcome to join us for the upcoming financial planning masterclasses with alumna Yelena Savinova, taking place as 2 sessions on the 2nd and the 16th of May, focused on introducing personalised financial health checks, tips and planning for future wealth maximisation. Maybe one of those is setting up your own entrepreneurial venture. We also have an academic insight webinar taking place on the 9th of May on the topic of multinational companies and human rights violations in emerging economies, delivered by Professor Kwaku Adams. And on the next slide, I've got something very exciting, which is to finally please save the date for this year's big Bradford reunion, which takes place on campus on 30th of September 2023. This will build on from the success of last year's inaugural event, bringing a day of activities on campus showcasing the research, celebrating anniversaries of different faculties that are celebrating their anniversaries this year, and the achievements of the university and alumni community. If you'd like to find out more about these events and book on, please visit the alumni events section on our website. So once again, finally, thank you to Chris for joining us as our guest. Thank you as well to Regina for joining us as the host. And thank you again for all of you for joining this event. Thank you and goodbye.